Ready, start. 3, 2, 1, fight.
Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic. So it's time to look at the second fight report for ARC's April meet, and that was with this guy, Mini Mammoth, or M&M as it was dubbed for the competition, just because I didn't actually want to sign something up as Mammoth, because even though it was inspired, there is a lot of difference in the chassis shape and design here. So I felt like changing it up a little bit and calling it M&M. I still probably need to come up with a proper name for this robot at some point. So our first fight up here was against Green Spike, which is one of the lone robots that runs in ARC's B League. It is just a fairly simple wedge.
2, 1, fight.
Okay, so this was an interesting fight. I was against somebody who was a new driver because it's a lone robot, that's kind of what they're there for. And that did give me a little bit of leeway in this fight. If I was against a more experienced driver, I probably would have lost very handedly in this fight, mostly because M&M is an interesting robot to fight with. There is a lot to think about in the driving of this robot because you have multiple controls over the weapon, and also where the weapon placement is at any time is actually important, because you don't want it sticking out the front, because that then kind of hampers your engagement against another robot. And you don't want it too far away, because then if you get a good spot where you can like get a pin and throw, the weapon takes time to spin up and get into the position that you want it to be in. And then of course you can go backwards and forwards, and the whole thing is just interesting. It was more thought than I was expecting going into this. I got my head around it fairly quickly, not potentially in this fight, but definitely going forwards I got my head around it a little bit more. But yeah, it was an interesting experience driving a rotary lifter in the arena, and it wasn't something that I was expecting. I wasn't expecting it to be, or at least to feel, more complicated than a regular robot. But it did a little bit. The other thing I noticed in this fight is something that was fairly obvious, I feel, at least anyway. That is that the current weapon setup as it stands does not have the power to throw someone over the wall. Yeah, I can kind of get flips if the geometry works, so the grip of the teeth isn't great, which I kind of knew going in. These are literally just PLA teeth. I need to do something better with those if I want more grip on them. And also we don't have the power to actually output enough torque to drag somebody up against the wall and get them over the wall. Not that that mattered all that much. Again, this was my opponent's first time driving ever. They did pretty well for a first-time driver, but then of course did end up in the open pit. It was a driving mistake, but hey, as a first fight, that wasn't too bad on their behalf. Next up, we have a robot called Front Flip. This is a front hinge flipper, which is also a lone robot. So again, fought by somebody who had not all that much experience fighting. But this particular person, I think I was their second fight up for the day, or maybe I was their third. I cannot remember the exact order here. But again, we had a fairly new driver, and again, I was kind of getting used to M&M still a little bit.
2, 1, fight.
this was an interesting fight because he was getting under me a decent amount of time, which was very interesting because M&M, as with all my robots these days, runs acetate at the front, and the acetate here is more important because the front armor doesn't actually touch the ground. I printed a new back standoff to try and fix that issue, but I still miscalculated, so the front armor doesn't actually touch where it needs to. I need to fix some stuff up in M&M and get that to work properly, but that does mean there is a bit of a gap that is being taken up by acetate, which should be okay in this robot, but yeah, this fight proved that there's obviously apparently enough of a gap in where the weapon sits that you can get in underneath the acetate and get under the robot fairly easily, which is definitely a design flaw we'll be working on at some point in the near future. We were getting better flips in this fight, and I think that is solely because of front flip's geometry. The geometry of that robot was a lot more conducive to being grabbed and thrown. It has nice kind of angles and sides and things on it that I was able to get a hold of a lot easier. Again, with better grippier teeth, I probably should be able to mitigate this problem going forwards against any type of robot, but the difference was quite stark between these two robots that we've just seen fight footage of, and I think that is all about front flip's actual geometry. And then of course, the very, very best moment of this fight, getting the weapon jammed up into his Pololu wheel and waggling him around. That was great. I loved that. I want to kind of aim for that from now on out because that was really, really cool. And also again showed that I just don't have quite enough torque. If I had more torque on the weapon, jamming the weapon arm into somebody's wheel and throwing them over backwards over top of me should be a viable strategy. And in fact, if we manage to get to that point, we could probably lift somebody up and hold them at the right height to just like drive them and drop them over the wall. Maybe. Fingers crossed. I mean, there's a lot of variables there, like we need to have opponents that have wheels that we can jam the arm into, and then of course we need to actually manage to do that in a fight. So there's some things happening there, but yeah, I think upgrading the weapon motor is definitely high on my priorities list for upgrades for this thing before the next event. The next fight up is against a robot called Flip. So we've gone from front flip to Flip, and Flip is actually built by the same builder as Hurt Feelings, and he designed it with the similar idea that I designed M&M, and that was to flip somebody over the wall. He just went a little bit more conventional with his flipper style. So some of you might recognize Flip as the Emmanuel design that has been on Thingiverse and posted on Facebook groups and all that kind of stuff. The builder of Hurt Feelings and Flip has also done some of their own work on it and put a very powerful servo in there, far more powerful than I think he probably needs, but it works really, really well because that power allows him to flip and flip and flip and flip, and yeah, he bullied me in this fight. It was fun though. It was a great fight from my end because even though I was being bullied, I still had the option of self-writing and being able to prove that that type of stuff worked. And it was honestly also just fun watching a weird, gangly, chaotic robot being thrown chaotically. Of course, you know, I wasn't going to win that fight. As soon as he got some really good flips on me, it was a case of, oh yeah, okay, you're going to flip me as I'm self-riding, you're going to get me into the pit. And that's basically what happened in this one. And as with the two previous fights, he was getting under me fairly easily, actually. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I think part of the reason for that is actually the wheels that I was running. We'll talk more about those wheels after a couple of the upcoming fights, because we need to get to those before we really dive deep into what was going on with the wheels and what's going on with the wheels now, and why there's some red in the robot. as it currently stands. Next up is a robot called Pivot Push. It is an interesting wedge that has two little pivoting arms that kind of rock back and forth that allow it to have these grippy arms sitting up regardless of which way up it is.
3, 2, 1, fight.
So we're trying to unstick the robots, have them as close to everything as possible. Alright, everyone turn your transmitters on, and then I'll count from 3 and we'll restart. Okay, let's restart. 3, 2, 1, fight.
So this fight, it's more of the same, as it turns out. Outside of the fact that we got the standoff at the back accidentally stuck inside the little space that he has his pivoting arms sit in, so we had to do an unstick there. There's more of the same from M&M here. It's too easy to get under, it needs more power to be able to throw things around, and aiming for wheels, surprisingly, works amazingly well. This was not a strategy that I had considered at all, and by a kind of two flukes here, it turns out that that is actually a very, very effective strategy for a rotary lifter like this, which is something I need to keep in mind and keep on board as I go through and do more fights with this in the future. Specifically, next month, I'm going to try and do these upgrades to make sure that we can jam into wheels more accurately and then also be grippy while we're in there and throw things around properly while we're in there. This was still a fun fight, lots of back and forthing on that again, and also did manage to get a couple of good flips. One, of course, actually ending the fight by getting him up on his side and leaving him really nowhere else to go, and he ends up driving down the pit and we win that fight. Then we have the last fight of the round robin, and this was up against a robot called Shredling. Now, Shredling has been through a number of iterations. It started its life as a shrapnel clone put into the B League. So our B League is a plastic non-destructive league, which basically means that as long as you have plastic for your exterior components, most things go, including spinners, as long as they're not too destructive. I mean, we put 99 red balloons in the plastic league at one point in the past. Shredling is a similar idea. The only thing is that the current ruling also says you're allowed wood, and so Shredling this time round is actually running wooden weaponry.
Let's start. 3, 2, 1, fight.
So that was interesting. This is the closest that Mini Mammoth or M&M is ever really going to be to fighting a weaponized robot, and it stood up surprisingly well. I was quite happy with how it took shots in terms of the actual, reacting to the forces going through the chassis. Nothing really looked like it got bent out of shape or broken in any significant way. There's some kind of Sharpie scratched off the front armor panels, but that was about it for the most part. One of the things I did find is that one of my PLA teeth actually got hit and cracked during this fight, and I didn't really see it too much in this fight, but it was actually at the point it was binding up, because there is an extra bar that runs along the back here that braces the two motors together, and this arm barely misses it. So when the tooth cracks, it can actually extend the reach of the arm just enough to hit this bar and cause the arm to stop working. So between this fight and the next fight, I hot glued the weapon tooth back together just to make sure that going into the next fight we were going to be okay. But yeah, so Mini Mammoth or M&M did a really good job in this fight, I thought. Survived those blows quite well, especially as they were getting up to a decent amount of speed before hitting. It was good to see. And we did also manage to, corral him into the corner and get a few little flips on him. Again, upping this weapon power is going to be critical to going forwards and performing just that little bit better in fights as we move ahead. So that was the round robin done, and we've done pretty well in the round robin. Well enough, in fact, that we were moving on through into the semi-finals. So as mentioned, I had hot glued one of those teeth back together, charged the batteries, and threw in against Dozer, which is a tracked robot with a nice scoop along the front.
3, 2, 1, fight.
And this is the fight we need to talk about wheels. So for this fight and all preceding fights, M&M was running ABS wheels with a single O-ring around the outside. Two things kind of come up as a problem for that. One, I think those wheels are actually slightly too big, which I think actually added to some of the issues of people getting in underneath the acetate at the front. And two, the single O-ring design, while lightweight and lightweight enough for M&M to make weight, wasn't great in terms of grip and pushing power. So we were losing a lot of shoving matches because of those single grip, and it was not anywhere more evident than in this fight up against a robot running full tracks, because there was just nothing we could do against the full tracks. The only option we really had was to run in face to face and then try and flip, because as you get the flip on the tracks, they get less and less and less contact area, and at a certain point we could then push back again. But again, not well, because the O-rings weren't great at that particular thing. The other flaw that happened in this fight is that the hot glue failed. It was hot glue into PLA and flexible PLA, and yeah, apparently didn't really like that. It didn't hold well enough, and so that tooth let go, but it was still kind of connected to the hot glue, so it was getting jammed and caught up a lot more in this fight than in the Shredling fight on itself, which was interesting because it also meant that there were some times where I was like, cool, I want to flip you right now, but I can't because the weapon arm is jamming into the chassis, so I've got to go back over the top to kind of reset and reflip, which is a lot to think about during a fight. It's not something that helps with a fight, especially because you're trying to keep track of where your opponent is, and you're also trying to keep track of how your arm's working and everything, and it got messy, essentially. I was having a lot of fun in this fight until the weapon started just flagging entirely. It was, yeah, not what I wanted to see out of this robot, so we definitely need to do something about these weapon teeth because, yeah, the PLA ones are terrible, and we need to make sure that we're swapping them and have spares and stuff for other fights, because we can't be going in with broken teeth and have them jam up, because that's just honestly bad. And then the end of this fight was also interesting. I think we got high-sided on something because I was spinning the wheels and they were spinning and we were going absolutely nowhere. My guess is that we got high-sided on something under the front armor, and basically the robot was touching on the front armor and on the back standoff and not really touching on the wheels, which was a bit of a problem and left us basically a sitting duck to be pushed down the pit, as we were. I mean, I did try and get out of that because we hadn't actually touched the bottom of the pit because we were kind of resting on the edge, so we were kind of more in the position of being counted out from 10 rather than the being knocked into the pit and out rule. But there was nothing really that I could do there. We were very, very much stuck, and realistically, we were in the pit, so we lost that fight. That means that we don't go into the first and second playoff, we instead go into the third, fourth playoff. And who do we meet in the third, fourth playoff but our good friend Flip? Now, going into this fight, I dug through all of my stuff and I found some extra Pololo wheels to try and fix this issue that I was having with the O-rings. I also just completely removed one of the teeth, the tooth that was broken. I decided to leave the tooth that wasn't broken on because it had survived this far, and Flip doesn't have a spinning weapon, so I was like, we should be good on this front.
All right, let's start. 3, 2, 1, fight.
That was a much better fight against Flip. That was a whole lot less one-sided than the previous one had been. We definitely didn't get as heavily bullied in this fight. In fact, we got a couple of really good pin and stacks against the wall, but of course, his flip mechanism, the way it works and the way it sits, means that if you're stacking him against the wall, he can just force himself off the wall with the flipping mechanism, and he's all good and ready to go. Again, if we had that little bit more power, stacking him against the wall would have been great because we could then lift him up from the back and maybe put him over the wall. Fingers crossed. I mean, that is the ultimate goal of this robot, so I'm going to keep trying until we get it. We're going to get it one day, I swear. It's going to happen. But yeah, so that was a lot better of a fight, a lot more back and forth. It's still a lot of fun as a fight. And then of course, we did still end up getting bullied into the pit eventually. This time round, I did try and like get myself back out again, but realistically, I was in the pit, and even if I'd actually managed to work my way back out of the pit, I still would have conceded the fight because I'd gone in there in the first place. It was more a bit of a thought experiment for me as to, can I do this? Can I actually make my way out of the pit, especially the half pit as it stands in the current Antway arenas? It'd be interesting to work that out. Unfortunately, couldn't manage it here, and while I was struggling around trying, he just, gave it a little bit of an extra nudge and made sure that we were definitely in the pit there. So honestly though, that is not bad. A brand new robot and we come 4th for the event. We probably could have done a little bit better had we made the wheel and tooth upgrades before the Dozer fight, but hey, you live and you learn, especially with a brand new build like this. These things just happen. So I am really actually quite happy with that, and M&M is a lot of fun to drive. So much so that I actually might at some point in the future look at doing a fully 3D printed version of this and releasing those files, because I want to see more big ants around the place. Obviously, those of you in the UK, talk to your event organizers about scrapping the cube rule so that you can do fun things like this. But for the rest of us, we can build interesting large ant weights and go with that. The final thing that happened in this event is the Rumble. So we had a B-League Rumble and I threw Mini Mammoth in.
Start in 3, 2, 1, fight.
Yeah, so that didn't go well. We got pinned in between 3 robots and immediately driven into the pit. That was just one of those things that happens in a Rumble, especially a Rumble where the pit is open from the very, very beginning. So I mean, that was a thing. I mean, it happens. From there, I was basically trying to get myself out of the pit, but I'd ended up sideways in the pit, and there's not a lot I can do to self-right from that particular position. I did manage to get myself to a point where I actually probably could have self-righted out of the pit. However, just as I was in that position and about to make the flip that I needed to make, Green Spike ended up coming in underneath me and pushing me back into the pit and coming into the pit themselves. So we were stopped from exiting the pit, and from there I was buried under other robots. They're still flailing the weapon around a little bit, but that was just because I was having a bit of fun, and basically at that point knew there was no way that we were getting out of the pit, especially with 2 other robots on top of us It just wasn't happening. So there you go. That is how Eminem went at ARC's April meet. It was a lot of fun. I'm very, very keen to make some minor upgrades to this and put it back in again at ARC's May meet. So hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next video.